Right. Well, hello and welcome everyone. Bonjour et bienvenue à toutes et tous. On behalf of the Institute on Quebec Studies at the State University of New York College at Plattsburgh, I'm Amy Southerton, Assistant Director, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Distinguished Quebec Address organized by the Institute on Quebec Studies at Suny, Plattsburgh, and to express appreciation to our sponsors, the Quebec Ministry of International Relations and La Francophonie, as well as the United States Department of Education Title VI. We especially appreciate our audience participation from SUNY Plattsburgh, including students, faculty, staff, and alumni. Thank you also to the business people and media representatives joining us from our New York State North Country region and beyond, as well as scholarly members of the Association of Canadian Studies in the United States and the American Council for Quebec Studies. In honor of March being the month of La Francophonie, the Institute on Quebec Studies traditionally offers programming on the SUNY Plattsburgh campus to celebrate our commitment to learning about Quebec and its diverse cultures. Today, as the Institute on Quebec Studies keynote event, the Distinguished Quebec Address explores timely and significant issues of concern to Quebec, Canada, the United States, and the international community. And for our second webinar rendition, we're delighted to have Dr. Daniel Bellon as today's speaker. During our time together in this webinar, we welcome you to ask any questions at any time and or to share your comments with panelists through the Q&A box on your screen. The Q&A box is where we ask you to submit any questions or comments to be addressed by the panelists. It is now my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Christopher Kirky, Director of the Institute on Quebec Studies at SUNY Plattsburgh and President of the Association for Canadian Studies in the United States.
Thank you, Amy. Good afternoon, everyone. Bonjour, chers collègues, chers amis. I'm happy, delighted to see that we have so many students with us today. The Distinguished Quebec Address is our signature annual event that goes back to the founding of our Institute on Quebec Studies in 2005. When we launched our institute, we felt that there was a need to have some type of special signature program that would feature prominent individuals who've made a profoundly positive contribution to Quebec public life. And since 2005, we've offered this forum, which has showcased business leaders, government officials, professors, and the like, to speak on a range of significant issues of concern to Quebec and the United States. Past speakers over the years have included, as I've suggested, several ministers, from the Minister of Health and Social Services to the Minister of International Relations and La Francophonie. We've had Andre Picard, national health columnist for the Globe and Mail. We've had, last year, we had Dr. Stéphane Paquin from École Nationale d'Administration Publique. We've had an array of wonderful speakers, and we're delighted today to be able to be joined by my colleague and friend, Daniel Bellon. Daniel, by way of background, is the director of the McGill Institute for the Study of Canada and the director of the Quebec Studies program. He's also the James McGill Professor in the Department of Political Science. His focus, his research, his scholarship has most sharply aimed at comparative fiscal and social policy. He is a prolific author, having published more than 20 books and almost 200 peer-reviewed articles. Having said that, if I can, Danielle's talk today is going to be titled, or is titled rather, Nationalism, Pandemic Management, and Electoral Politics in Quebec. The overview of that title suggests that ahead of what's going to be elections this October in Quebec, Danielle's remarks will look at the actions, discourses, and strategies of the current Premier, François Legault's government, the Coalition Avenir Québec, CAQ as it's known, through three complementary lenses. He's going to look at the evolution of nationalism, the management of the COVID-19 pandemic, and the overall electoral positioning of the CAQ on key policy issues in Quebec, as well as those of other provincial political parties. I think Danielle's looking to stress today the factors that explain the enduring popularity of a recently emerged politician, Francois Legault, as Premier of Quebec, and the challenges his government faces just months ahead of the current provincial election. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Daniel. And after Professor Belland's remarks, I will be pleased to moderate a question and answer session. So with that, Daniel, we're so happy to have you here with us today. Please.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thanks for the invitation. Bonjour tout le monde. I'm really glad to be here with you today. This is really a big picture talk. This is not a traditional academic talk. I was told not to assume that people, especially the students listening, have really a prior knowledge, extensive knowledge of Quebec politics. So I would start with really broad remarks about the party system in Quebec, about Francois Legault and the CAQ, talking about what has happened since the last provincial elections in 2018, and looking forward at the next few months and the provincial elections scheduled for early October of this year. So I have a little slideshow for you here. I think Chris already summarized my talk. This is what I will talk about. The order is a bit different than what I sent in the outline, because I will start talking about nationalism, then electoral politics, and really the policy positioning of the CAQ government of Francois Legault. And I will end with pandemic management and where we are going from there in terms of electoral politics, thinking about the fall elections here in Quebec. In terms of, if we want to understand the current CAQ government, the Coalition Avenir Québec, under the leadership of Francois Legault, I think it's good to take just a few really broad remarks about the party system in Quebec and how it has evolved over time. Clearly, from the early 70s to the mid 2010, there was really a domination of two parties in Quebec. So the Federalist Parti Libéral du Québec, the oldest party in the province, if you look at the major parties, and the Sovereignist Parti Québécois, the PQ. So PLQ and PQ. Of course, the PQ is a much more recent party, was created in 1968, and it was in power between 1976 and 85. 94 to 2003, 2012, 2014 under a minority government. For the rest of the period, it was the PLQ in power. Clearly, we have other parties in Quebec. It's not like in the United States where you have really two parties, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. We have actually a quite fragmented party system right now by at least Quebec standards. So we have, in addition to the PLQ, which is the Federalist Party, and the PQ, which supports sovereignty, so the independence of Quebec vis-à-vis Canada. We have the Québec Solidaire, QS, which is a left-wing party that is located within the sovereignist camp, just like the PQ, but it's further to the left of the Parti Québécois. And the creation of Québec Solidaire and its expansion, electorally speaking, has contributed to a decline of the PQ over time. The party currently in power, that's been in power since 2018, is the Coalition Avenir Québec, which is a very recent party. It was created only in 2011. It's a right of center party, a nationalist party, but a party that does not support sovereignty, okay? So it's strong, I think it's quite distinct from the PQ and the QS because it's not a sovereignist party, but it's much more nationalistic than the current Liberal Party of Quebec, so the PLQ. And this is a coalition of former sovereignists and federalists who advocate for greater provincial autonomy within Canada. And this party replaced the Action démocratique du Québec, the ADQ, which was created in 1994 and merged with the CAQ in early 2012. And just like the ADQ before it, the CAQ is centered around its founder and only leader so far, François Legault. So François Legault is a major figure in Quebec politics, and he has really strong control over this party that he helped create just a bit more than a decade ago. So in 2018, the CAQ actually won a majority government, and that was a stronger performance than quite a few observers had imagined. We have to say that in 2012, 2014, so the first two elections that the CAQ competed in, the party finished in third place with only 19 and 21 seats respectively out of 125. But in 2018, they won a majority of seats, 74 seats, with 37.5% of the votes. In our electoral system, you can get way more than 50% of the seats with less than 40% of the votes. That's our first past the post system. It's the way it works. And certainly it's been advantageous to the CAQ. And it was a strong victory. The Liberals only won 31 seats, which was an abysmal performance for them. The PQ did poorly with 10 seats, and Québec Solidaire won 10 seats. The scope of the CAQ's victory was, I think, quite stunning. But what's really fascinating too is that François Legault and his party have remained quite popular since 2018. The honeymoon that we call the honeymoon after you form government lasted quite a long time. And despite the pandemic and some fluctuation in polling numbers, François Legault remains one of the most popular premiers in the country. So why is that? And what are the main, I would say, factors that we have to take into account to understand the CAQ government in Quebec and what's happening with Quebec politics heading towards the next provincial elections in early October. Obviously, when we talk about Quebec politics, we have to talk about substate nationalism, especially because the CAQ is explicitly a nationalist coalition. And nationalism is what, of course, brings these people together. And also the rejection of the idea of holding a third referendum on sovereignty. Quebec had a referendum on sovereignty in 1980, 1995. And certainly the Parti québécois still supports the idea of having a new referendum on sovereignty, but the CAQ is opposed to this. So what the CAQ promotes instead is a strong nationalist vision centered on the protection of French language and a push for secularism inspired by measures adopted in France regarding religious clothing and symbols. Actually, on secularism, Bill 21 proved popular, especially among older Francophone voters, but it also triggered strong criticisms, partly because of its preventive use of the notwithstanding clause, which allows provinces to actually shield the legislation from court challenges under some sections of the Federal Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And this is something that the government can do for 5 years and then renew it for another 5 years afterwards. And this is quite a controversial move. And people have criticized this move in Quebec, but also in other provinces. The federal government, however, has not intervened in the case. And it's in front of, there are court cases, of course, legal challenges to this legislation that bans the people in position of authority within the public sector, so in schools, so teachers, also judges and police officers to wear religious symbols. And this raises a lot of issues in terms of religious freedoms and individual rights. And there is an ongoing debate about Bill 21 in Quebec. It's, of course, now the law of the land and the province, but it's facing, as I said, court challenges. On the language front, which is another major aspect of the politics of nationalism in Quebec. Bill 96 is currently under consideration in the National Assembly. This bill is popular among Francophones, but it's a source of anxiety among the Anglophone minority in the province. In Quebec, we talk about, about 85% Francophone, but there is an Anglophone minority. It's been in Quebec for a very long time. And certainly many people within that community are nervous about Bill 96 and some of its provisions. Also, Bill 96 includes features an attempt to unilaterally revise the federal constitution in terms of parts of it that deals with Quebec. So it's a very interesting piece of legislation, and we'll see whether it's actually enacted before the early October elections or not. If it's not the case, then the CAQ could really make it a central part of its electoral platform. If it is adopted, they will, of course, claim that this is a major victory for them and for the protection of French language in Quebec. But certainly when we talk about nationalism in Quebec right now, in addition to the traditional push to increase the autonomy of the province vis-a-vis the federal government and push back against centralizing attempts on the part of the federal government, the CAQ has focused its attention on secularism and more recently on language. In terms of the electoral positioning of the CAQ and its nature, when we talk about other policy options, other policy alternatives beyond, say, those closely associated with nationalism, like language and secularism, there is a sense that the CAQ is much more moderate than the ADQ that they replaced, they merged with in 2012. The ADQ was really a neoliberal party. They were supporting retrenchment, scaling back really government in the province. Quebec has a very large public sector in terms of number of civil servants. It has the highest tax burden, or one of the highest in North America, not just in Canada, but if you include the US states as well. We have a really big government, provincial government in Quebec. And the CAQ has not really pushed forward major forms of retrenchment or austerity. And that's a contrast with the Couillard Liberal government. So before the CAQ, there was Philippe Couillard, who was the premier, and it was a PLQ, a liberal government. And they enacted some austerity measures that were very unpopular. And the CAQ decided basically to move away from austerity. According to my friend Olivier Jacques from the University of Montreal, the CAQ is a party guided by electoral pragmatism and an obsession with the median voter. Okay, so it's a quite centrist party, certainly center-right, but on social policy issues, it has really supported the universal childcare system in Quebec, even removed some measures enacted under the Liberals that made this system less universal. They have really embraced the so-called Quebec model, modèle québécois, which is grounded in a proactive provincial state, provincial government, and higher levels of public funding and taxation than in other provinces. It doesn't mean that they're, that Legault is not interested in some limited tax cuts and so forth, but Legault does support, I would say, existing social programs and the large welfare state, especially with regard to childcare and families that's been created in Quebec since the 1960s. And that is very important to understand. This is a party that's quite pragmatic ideologically, and some people will argue that it's because it's centered around a leader, around François Legault. And as a leader, François Legault, looking at the polls with his advisor, can look at the level of public support among Francophones mainly. It's not a party that needs or is really seeking strong support among or even significant support among the Anglophone or Allophone minorities who are concentrated, who live primarily in the Montreal area. The CAQ is very weak in Montreal, only won a couple of seats on the island of Montreal back in 2018. And it's a party that is really Francophone party. This has, of course, created some tensions, as I mentioned earlier, talking about Bill 21 and the ongoing debate on Bill 96. But in terms of social policy issues, economic issues, we have here a government that is quite centrist, focusing on economic growth. One of the dreams of François Legault is that Quebec would finally catch up with Ontario in terms of average wage and so forth. That you know, there is a long rivalry between Ontario and Quebec. For those who have watched, you know, Bon Cop, Bad Cop, or Bon Cop, Bad Cop 2, which are two movies, comedies about, in part, the relationship between Ontario and Quebec. But François Legault is a bit obsessed with the idea of catching up with Ontario. And he wants to do this with the help of a strong provincial state. Now, the pandemic. The pandemic has increased support for governmental intervention, not just in Quebec, but elsewhere around the world. And when the first wave of the pandemic hit, it was very, very tough in Quebec. Our long-term care system, our nursing homes that already faced major challenges before the pandemic, really witnessed really thousands of deaths. And there were some poor decisions early on made by the CAQ government, but also the legacy of the existing system of nursing homes, which was already in really bad shape before the pandemic. And I have to say that despite this, François Legault, during the first month of the pandemic, was able to frame himself really as a reassuring figure, and that he adopted really measures that are sometimes quite tough, like the first province-wide curfew in the late 2000, early 2021, sorry, early 2020, sorry, late 2020 and early 2021, typo here on the slide. Although Quebec, in terms of public health measures, there are in some areas it's lacking compared to other provinces. For example, Legault failed twice to impose vaccination upon healthcare workers because there was too much risk that doing that will lead a lot of employees to actually leave, which will have created major problems. So it's not that Quebec did much more than some other provinces, but certainly the discourse, the rhetoric that François Legault used about bringing people together, and also about really pushing hard to have people getting vaccinated in 2021, is something that helped the premier. And frankly, if you look at public opinion data during the pandemic, there was some fluctuation, and in recent months, a bit of a decline in terms of support for the CAQ. But overall, François Legault remains still one of the most popular premiers in Canada. And it's been the case nonstop since 2018, since he became premier. So he remains quite popular, even if the Omicron wave has not been managed properly by the CAQ, at least at first. They were taken aback by the Omicron wave, not the only government in that situation. And I think that there was some backlash against some of their measures. The second curfew received much less support than the first one, and was not really grounded in scientific evidence as far as we know. So there was a lot of debate about this. In the aftermath of the trucker convoys and so-called trucker convoys and protests against public health measures, there's also in Quebec the rise of the Conservative Party of Quebec, which used to be really, really tiny, but that's now much, is actually doing quite well in the polls right now. And that is important to understand the fact that the the rise of the Conservative Party of Quebec under leader Éric Duhaime, a party that is against public health restrictions in the name of personal freedom. This party is now becoming a significant player in the Quebec City area, for example, something that might be a source of preoccupation for the CAQ. Now, when we talk about the elections that are coming up very, very soon in October the 3rd, we see that the CAQ is still above 40% in the polls. And we saw that in 2018 with less than 38% of the polls, they won nearly 75 seats. So they are clearly in majority territory now. We have an opposition that is divided. It is really divided, fragmented. It is a fragmented opposition. The PLQ is not polling well at all among Francophones. Even Anglophones, many Anglophones are not so happy right now. They think that the PLQ takes them for granted, especially in the context of debate over Bill 96 on language. So the PLQ is facing really a difficult situation, trying to move towards the left under its current leader, Dominique Anglade. But right now, it's not paying off that much, certainly in the polls. The PQ, again, I mentioned earlier that up to 2018, the two main political parties in Quebec for decades in a row were the PLQ and the PQ. The PLQ is not in good shape, and the PQ is on life support. And you look at the polling numbers right now, the party could really struggle to keep its 9 seats. It only has 9 right now. The fourth party in the National Assembly, which is very bad for the PQ, if you look at what they did since the mid-1970s, and they could lose most of these seats if their polling numbers don't increase. So this is really dire situation for the PQ. As for Québec Solidaire, it's a small kind of youth-oriented urban party. And I think it has a strong base mainly in Montreal, but a bit now in some parts of Quebec City. But they are right now unlikely to make significant gains come October. Of course, we are just in March, so a lot of things can change in politics, right? 6 months in politics is a very long time. But right now, it seems that the CAQ has succeeded in gaining strong support among Francophones, especially older Francophones, because of its nationalist agenda, because of its kind of middle of the road economic and social policies, and because of its perceived response, because of its response to the pandemic, and the fact that as opposed to, say, Jason Kenney, the Premier of Alberta, François Legault is perceived as someone who has found a way to unite Quebecers during the pandemic for the most part, even if, again, Omicron has received mixed reviews in terms of the way the CAQ government has managed it. Now, conclusions. I was asked to speak only 30 to 35 minutes. I hope I'm on time. Yeah, wow, that's pretty good. Okay, so the CAQ is a nationalist party that remains popular among Francophones. Again, we have to distinguish, though, where they live in terms of demographics, their age, income, education levels. I'm not an electoral sociologist, but Quebec is hardly homogeneous, even when you look at Francophones, but certainly it's a party that has strong support among Francophones in many regions of Quebec outside of Montreal. And I would say that the CAQ policies have proved popular among Francophones overall, even if, as I said, Bill 21 is much less popular among younger people than older people, if you take Francophones. But the majoritarian approach of the CAQ regarding Bill 21 and Bill 96, for example, on immigration policy, where at first, at least, the government restricted immigration numbers before changing course in 2021. Certainly, the CAQ government has exacerbated tensions with ethnic, racial, and religious minorities. And also with Indigenous peoples. We saw that with the debate over the death of this Indigenous woman, Joyce Echequan, a few years ago in Joliet. And the fact that François Legault, the premier, does not recognize the existence of systemic racism in Quebec. So in Quebec, there is a big debate about systemic racism. And François Legault says, yes, you have racism in Quebec, you have racist individuals, but there is no system of racism in Quebec. And a lot of people, especially on the left of the political spectrum, regardless of their background or origin, whether they're Francophone or not, they have criticized this stance. And it's a major debate today, and I'm sure it will be also central to the next provincial campaign. So we have here a nationalist party, the CAQ, but certainly there are concerns among religious, racial, and language minorities, as I said, and this is something that we are likely to talk about moving forward over the next few months ahead of the next provincial elections. Yes, so something I want to talk about here too is, before we have the questions and discussion, is the relationship between the CAQ and the federal government. So here you see Justin Trudeau and François Legault. That was a cartoon from the spring of 2020, when François Legault asked Justin Trudeau to send the Canadian Armed Forces in Quebec to help in nursing homes, which in Quebec are called CHSLD. That's the sign you see below the premier. And certainly François Legault at that time really called Ottawa for help, which is not something that you will expect a nationalist leader in Quebec to do, because of course, a central issue for the CAQ is the autonomy of the province. But since then, we've seen some tensions emerging between Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister, of course, and Premier Legault. We see that, of course, on healthcare funding, the idea that Ottawa could impose national standards, national norms in terms of long-term care. We've seen also during the last federal campaign last year that François Legault really supported called Quebecers to vote for the Conservative Party of Canada rather than the Liberal Party of Canada of Justin Trudeau. And that call actually misfired, because in the end, the Conservatives didn't make any significant gains in Quebec or across the country for that matter. And the Liberals are still in power in Ottawa at the federal level with a minority government. Despite this, I think Trudeau and Legault work together. But there is always, with a nationalist government in Quebec City and a Liberal Party in Ottawa, this tension that might be in the background and sometimes move to the foreground. And we'll see what will happen over the next few months, whether actually relationship between Quebec City and Ottawa, between the province of Quebec and the federal government, if this relationship will become a major issue of the campaign. This could happen if there is a court ruling on Bill 21, for example, or on something else. That could, of course, change a bit the political dynamics. Also, we can certainly hope that there will be some collaboration, of course, between Ottawa and Quebec, and it's actually going on beyond all the rhetoric I mentioned earlier, that Legault criticizing Trudeau and so forth, and the Liberals. There was a high level of collaboration between Ottawa and the provinces, including Quebec, especially during the first months of the pandemic. And now we see, of course, we don't know what will happen next, but the federal government did deliver on vaccines, and the provinces, especially Quebec, did well in really implementing the vaccination campaign, and Quebec is has a high rate of vaccination overall. So intergovernmental issues might become an aspect of the next provincial campaign in Quebec, but I think that so far I would say that what I can see is that there will be a strong emphasis on language politics, on secularism, national identity, and also, I will say, especially in the context of rising inflation numbers, on economic policy and well-being. So if the pandemic fades away, if it fades away, I think that Legault will return to what his really favorite topic is, which is economic growth for the province and expanding the economy of Quebec. But there are some tensions moving ahead in that case, tensions over immigration policy, whether we should further increase the number of immigrants who come to Quebec every year, even if there are some concerns among many Francophones about the immigrants learning French. You have also other tensions in terms of public spending. And I think Quebec is in a much better fiscal situation than it used to be. But the pandemic was, of course, a major challenge. Ottawa paid foot most of the bill in terms of paying for emergency support for workers, families, and businesses during the pandemic. And that's really important. That helped Quebec and the other provinces. But there are still a lot of tensions between Ottawa and the provinces. And it's really impossible to imagine a provincial elections in Quebec during which there is no strong debate about federalism and relationship between Ottawa and the provinces. So we should expect that moving forward. The last item I have not talked about today that's very important for Quebecers is the environment. Because the pandemic, I don't think we have talked that much about the environment in recent years in Quebec. But there is opposition on the part of François Legault to Energy East and other pipeline ideas, new pipelines that could cross the territory of Quebec, and Quebec's strong take on climate change, I think, is creating some intergovernmental tensions with Alberta and some Western provinces. And this is something we'll of course, follow moving forward. You know, there is a lot of discussion right now about high gas prices, about inflation become a major issue. And the Legault government will have to tackle this just like the federal government and other provincial governments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Danielle. Merci beaucoup for that wonderful conversation and big picture view of Quebec politics and Quebec society. We greatly appreciate it. You won't be surprised to learn that we've had several questions come in for your consideration, and they're going to range historically and politically. So it's going to be fun for you. And I'll start off with an easy one, if there is such a thing, and it's not, of course. I'm just being sarcastic. Would you describe François Legault as a modern-day version of Maurice Du Plessis? Legault's focus on Francophone language rights and his economic nationalism, one of our viewers suggests, is making some of the same rhetorical appeals. How do you feel about that?
Yes, thank you. So Maurice Du Plessis was a premier of Quebec until the late 1950s, and he was the leader of Union Nationale. And it's true that people have compared this party, Union Nationale, with the CAQ, because these are two parties that emphasize provincial autonomy, but not the quest for sovereignty, for independence. Okay, so I think that, yes, people have compared Du Plessis, this former premier, with François Legault. I think it's quite different. And ideologically, of course, Legault has embraced secularism, while Du Plessis was very close to the Catholic Church, for example. But there are some similarities in terms of this emphasis on remaining within Canada, but increasing the autonomy of the province within the country. And certainly this is something that many people have commented on, but I don't think we should push the analogy too far, because Quebec has changed a lot since the late 1950s. For example, Du Plessis, was really a strong proponent of free markets and opposed what we now call the welfare state, right? And François Legault is not doing that. François Legault is preserving the social programs that Quebec have. So the environment is very different. But in terms of the type of nationalism that Legault articulates, yes, it's probably closer to the nationalism of Du Plessis to a certain extent, if you remove the Catholicism from it, than the nationalism of, say, sovereignists like René Lévesque to a certain extent.
Fair enough. Very good. We have another inquiry here. People are interested in asking, given your examination of the CAQ and François Legault, you mentioned that the Liberals and the Parti Québécois are basically in a state of an ongoing crisis. And part of that you could suggest for the Liberals, or, you know, they've got essentially some they have the Montreal ridings, they have a few ridings, Sherbrooke, Quebec City, but they've lost the Francophone vote. The PQ, as you point out, are down to 9 seats in the National Assembly. And there's some discussion, I guess, about the current leadership of both of those parties. And it raises the question for one person of who, even with the new Conservative Party of Quebec, who's going to challenge François Legault and the CAQ in the next election?
It is difficult because of as I said, the fragmentation of the opposition. So you know, the Liberals, the PQ, Québec Solidaire, and now I don't know if the Conservatives at the provincial level will be able to elect a few MNAs come early October, but that will even exacerbate the fragmentation. Because the rise of Éric Duhem and his party is really related to the pandemic in opposition to public health measures. But if we are moving away from these public health measures, that might not be good news for Éric Duhem and his Conservative Party, which will be, of course, good for the CAQ, and that's what they hope by removing most of the public health measures gradually right now over the next weeks and moving forward, next weeks and months. I think that they hope that they will suck the air out and that there will not be anything else for the Conservatives to fight on. But the thing with the CAQ is because it has adopted really on many issues, I mentioned economic, social policy issues, a centrist approach. There are some people within the CAQ who are farther to the right, and they are also tempted by the Conservatives. And it's not necessarily just because of the pandemic, the public health restrictions during the pandemic, but also because that they think that the CAQ is, you know, too moderate, too centrist for them. So it will be interesting to follow that. But right now, I think that François Legault is in a very good position facing this fragmented opposition to win another majority of seats come early October. But again, a lot of things can change between now and then. But I think both the Liberals and the PQ are really struggling right now, and I don't see any miracle happening between now and early October for these two parties.
You know, we have an interesting question here, observation from one of our students, which makes one think. You know, here in New York State, we recently underwent a period of governance where we had a very strong leader, Andrew Cuomo. He was a Democrat. He managed arguably to straddle the left and the right of the political spectrum. He dominated his party, and during his tenure in office, Republicans were arguably increasingly marginalized in New York State. And one might say, well, this was going to be a permanent state of affairs. But we know it wasn't, for the obvious reasons. So the reason this was raised was to, you know, given your remarks today, to suggest that as strong as things look for the CAQ and Legault, things happen. And we don't know what those things might be or might not be. But if there's anything that's true in the world of politics, is that as soon as you're banking on something significant changes. So I thought that was a nice observation.
And I agree with that. I don't make predictions. I've never made predictions. I remember, you know, when Trump became president, what happened, and now many people proved wrong, including. So I'm not predicting any outcome. I'm just saying right now, François Legault looked in his party are in an excellent position if you look at the polling numbers. But as I said, 6 months in politics is long, and yet you can always have an unforeseen scandal or something big that happens that could change things in a quite dramatic way. You saw that in the beautiful state of New York, and this could happen in Quebec. It could be a different a scandal of a different nature, of course, but things happen in politics, and that's why I don't make predictions. I'm also bad at it.
Yeah, that's two good reasons not to do it. So the increased emphasis on nationalism in Quebec, I think it's fair to say most historians, political scientists, sociologists would point out that this seems to be more of a, in respect, a global phenomenon. That whether it's with regard to subnational actors like provinces or states or federal jurisdictions, there seems to be a notable uptick on nationalist politics and nationalist sentiments. Is it fair to say that Quebec is part of that larger picture?
Yes, there is a debate about this. Sub-state nationalism in Quebec has been strong for a long time. And the Quebec nationalism that we see today really came out of the Quiet Revolution, but has changed over time. And the CAQ, in a way, has reframed sub-state nationalism in Quebec in some ways. I mentioned the kind of majoritarian approach. Some people have talked about populism. I think that it's part of the story. I also mentioned the influence of France, for example, on secularism, where the policies that we adopted in Quebec are quite similar to what you see in some European countries. And some politicians in Quebec would say, well, they do it in France and other countries, so we can do it too. So I think that there is a broader international context. I agree with this. At the same time, we have to understand that, sub-state nationalism has been around in Quebec for a very long time, and it's interesting to see how it's being reshaped by the CAQ. Someone mentioned, Du Plessis earlier. Again, I think that there are some analogies, but there is still something I think new about the CAQ. The emphasis on secularism. Secularism was not that a big issue. It was a major issue during the Quiet Revolution in the sense that, creating a strong provincial state, public schools and so forth, public hospitals. But the emphasis on religious symbols, for example, is something that really only became a major issue in Quebec 15, 18 years ago during the mid-2000s. And so this is something that it's not François Legault who's changed it. It's the ADQ under Mario Dumont emphasized this issue a lot. And then the PQ with the Charter of Values emphasized that. And the CAQ took that over. And now secularism, especially this emphasis on religious symbols, has become a major aspect of Quebec nationalism today. And the PQ wants to go even farther than the CAQ in that regard. But at the same time, there are elements of continuity, like the focus, of course, on French language, which is something that has been there since the very beginning.
It has. Can you give our audience today, what's the general pulse in Quebec society about the restrictions that were imposed, if you will, by Quebec government and public health authorities regarding the COVID-19 pandemic, and what, citizens of Quebec could and could not do?
Yes. So there was quite a bit of tolerance for public health measures, strong public health measures, up to quite recently, I would say. Of course, if you look at the curfew, the province-wide curfew that was adopted in late 2020 during the holiday season, there was a significant majority of Quebecers who supported that move. So polling numbers is like 2/3 of Quebecers supported that curfew, which is quite impressive, even if the curfew was controversial and some even public health experts debated whether it will work or not. So I think that there was quite a bit of tolerance or even support for public health measures in the province. But I think with Omicron, the second curfew, there's a fatigue that we see not just again in Quebec, but all over Canada and across the world. And I think that also because so many people in Quebec have been vaccinated, many of them expected that they will be able to resume their normal activities and normal, quote unquote, life. And Omicron was a big shock. And I think people blame the government for that. Even if Omicron, of course, is something that they could not control, they could have anticipated it a bit better. But I think that I would say that support is a bit more fragile than it was at the beginning of the pandemic, that's for sure.
Makes sense, makes sense. We have an inquiry regarding Quebec's election system, and that is that the CAQ, when in 2018 had expressed interest in electoral reform, maybe moving or studying or considering a mixed proportional system.
Mm-hmm.
Have you heard anything? Is there any word now that they're in power, safely in power, having majority of the 125 seats in the Nationals? Any kind of conversation on that point anywhere?
Well, we were supposed to have a plebiscite on electoral reform, where the government was moving in that direction at least, but now it's no longer the case. So it's what it happened at the federal level too after 2015 after Justin Trudeau became prime minister, and a while later they decided to scrap the idea of electoral reform, and that's what's happening in Quebec right now with the CAQ. When the system is working for you so well, why would you want to change it? And looking at the polling numbers, as I said, I think that when you can win a significant majority of seats with 38% of the votes, and you're in power, why would you want to change that system? So I don't think the system is going anywhere for the time being.
I'd be shocked. I think it's always a pattern of political parties to campaign on this, and then ultimately, particularly if they secure a majority government in a parliamentary system, the incentive disappears to move on that, right? Mm-hmm. Because why would you want to, increase the possibility of injuring your position in power? That's for certain. I think one of the points that you raised earlier, Daniel, is really excellent, which is, amongst others, which is that while the CAQ is nationalist and pragmatic, they've managed very successfully, and I don't think a lot of people thought they would be able to do this, or that they would govern like this. They've managed to position themselves as a centrist force in Quebec politics, and I think that's really appealing. Especially when you have, as you point out, this fragmented opposition, and that's going to, I think, bode well for them. So,
are you making a prediction here?
I might be more willing to predict, but I think I'll hold off. I'll make an observation instead. So
it's probably a smart move.
Yeah, I don't know if there's going to be anything that's going to come up to sort of derail that campaign. But can you also tell for our audience here, principally of American students, scholars, and general public, not that long ago in Ottawa, Ottawa underwent what a variety of news outlets called a truckers' protest. Is it in a lot of respects a poor choice of words, a poor phrase, because while there were clearly some disgruntled and for obvious reasons truckers involved, it was a much broader alt-right, center-right movement that in simple terms wreaked havoc in Canada's national capital for more than 3 weeks. And it took the Prime Minister to move forward with the Emergencies Act and a variety of steps, law enforcement steps, to move forward to sort of end this. I think it's also important that you tell our audience today that while nothing of the same magnitude has surfaced in Quebec, there have been rumblings, and there have been. So if you can tell folks what's going on in Quebec in that regard, that might be helpful.
Yeah. So if you look at what happened in Ottawa, I think it's the first thing is that it was an enormous failure of policing. Really amateurish job on the part of the Ottawa police and frankly, the Ontario Provincial Police and the RCMP. And that's why the Emergencies Act in the end was invoked. Actually, François Legault was opposed to this using the Emergencies Act, but because it was targeting mainly what was happening in Ottawa, and it was only, they invoked it for 8 or 9 days in total, right? So it was pretty short, and it was not like what happened with the with the War Measures Act, of course, that was used last time in October 1970 in Quebec, and so very bad negative memories of that traumatic moment in our history. But there were some protests against public health measures in Quebec City, Montreal, and elsewhere. Truckers also, and other people who claim to be truckers or are with the truckers. And the rise of the Conservative Party of Quebec suggests that there is a certain percentage of Quebecers, it may be 10, 15%, maybe more, who really want all the public health measures to be dismantled altogether. And actually, it's probably more than that now. If you look at the polls, of course, who want all public health measures to be dismantled, but there are people who really are willing to, focus their political attention and make that the single issue they focus on. And these are the people who rally behind Éric Duhaime and in his party. But now I think what I'm seeing is that the Legault government is sense that, there is this fatigue, and that the small minority of people who are strongly opposed to public health measures, that this is, that this was maybe growing. And so I think that he decided in the end to gradually remove some public health measures. I think they would have been removed anyway, but maybe he removed them a bit earlier because of what was happening and the rise of the Conservative Party of Quebec and the truckers and so forth. The Quebec is not immune from far-right politics and we have these movements in Quebec as well. And some of the protesters in Ottawa were from Quebec. We saw quite a few Quebec flags in Ottawa during the occupation for 3 weeks. So I think this is a movement that exists all across the country. There is something, of course, distinct about the far right in Quebec, but it's something that is there, part of Quebec society. It's been there for a long time, but I think that the pandemic has been used by some people on the far right to really mobilize people around something that's not immigration, which is something that traditionally the far right focuses on immigration. But right now, of course, their focus is more on the pandemic. And this is something that we've seen all across the country, including in Quebec.
Thank you, Dan. I will see if there's any last remarks for Daniel. You've given us a great whirlwind of comments, I must say. Somebody was just curious about if, with respect to the CAQ and their position on secularism, their position on the French language, their position on Quebec autonomy, is it unrealistic, given their positions on those various issues? Is there any sense that the CAQ or Legault himself has it been suggested that in some ways that those positions are marginalizing immigrants who are coming to Quebec, or it's racializing the political discourse in Quebec?
Yes, so I mentioned this debate over systemic racism, right. And I think that Legault has faced a lot of criticism on that front for not doing enough to fight racism, even if now there's a minister in charge of anti-racism in Quebec. It's considered an area where the government could do much more in terms of reconciliation as well with Indigenous peoples, anti-racism. And there's, of course, Bill 21 when we talk about religious minorities, especially Muslim, and I would say Muslim women in particular. And that has been an ongoing debate in Quebec, and it's not something that's going away. François Legault said that he wanted to end the debate on secularism by enacting Bill 21, but the debate isn't over. And you look at younger people in Quebec, they are much more critical of Bill 21, regardless of their origin, including Francophones, much less likely to support Bill 21 than older folks, older Francophones. And so there is also a generational gap, or that's important. And so things are likely to evolve over time as the society changes and as these younger people maybe become more influential.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Daniel. I am now, I'm going to ask everybody to join me in thanking Daniel for a wonderful presentation. Thank you, Daniel. I'm going to turn it over to Amy. Amy, please.
And at this time, I'm going to ask for audience feedback on this session via the Zoom poll being presented on your screen. I'd also like to say thank you, merci bien, to Daniel and to Chris for exploring these important ideas on nationalism, pandemic management, and electoral politics in Quebec. To our virtual audience members, thank you so much for taking the time to be here today and for submitting your very informative and helpful questions. To our supporters, we're most grateful for your support towards Suny Plattsburgh's Institute on Quebec Studies' mission and commitment to the visible development, expansion, and dissemination of Quebec studies among academic, business, and government constituents. For more information on Quebec Studies programming at Suny Plattsburgh, please check out our webpage, www.plattsburgh.edu/IQS. And please be sure to sign up for our mailing list from the news events page or by visiting tinyurl.com/IQS mailing. With a look to the future, I'm delighted to announce and to invite you to 2 upcoming events taking place later this month as we continue to celebrate Quebec in March as the month of La Francophonie. So on Tuesday, March 22nd at 5 p.m., Dr. Mary Ann Poutinot, a historian who teaches at McGill University and Concordia University, will virtually present Little Fists for Social Justice, Anti-Semitism, Community, and Montreal's Aberdeen School Strike of 1913. To sign up for this event, please visit tinyurl.com/Quebec Studies March 22. Again, that's tinyurl.com/Quebec Studies March 22. And on Thursday, March 24 at 5 p.m., the Suny Plattsburgh Distinguished Fulbright Chair in Quebec Studies, Dr. Jean-François Gabou, Professor of Political Science visiting from Université de Montréal, will present the Distinguished Fulbright Chair in Quebec Studies lecture in person only in Prinevitz Hall on campus. The presentation title is Stability and Change in the 2022 Quebec Election. So we hope you will join us for these upcoming events. And on a final note, we hope you'll enjoy the rest of your day. Merci et well wishes.